Okay. Great. So tonight, hi there, everybody. It is, can you believe it? It's March 20th already. Monday night, it's 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and I'm here in the Detroit airport. You're watching the people mover going by there, and I'm hanging out here till about 10 o'clock before I get on my plane to go to Providence. I think most of you guys had a pretty nice spring break, but it couldn't have compared to my spring break, because who would believe that the United States State Department would invite me on the week of spring break to go to Rome, Italy, and talk about fake news with a whole bunch of really interesting Italian journalists and professors and students. And so I believe it was the best spring break of my entire life, getting to travel around Rome and meet amazing people and have really good debates about this fake news situation. So for me, I got a chance to really deepen my thinking about this topic that we've all been thinking about. I got to introduce people to my propaganda website. I got to talk about digital media literacy and tell stories about you guys, you know, the graduates and the about to be graduates of the the graduate certificate in digital literacy, and really got to wonder about the difference between a blogger and a journalist, if there is a difference, the difference between mainstream media and alternative media, if there is a difference, the nature of partisanship, because in Italy, their press is hyper partisan and partisan. We're living now in an age of rising partisanship. And of course, the rise of hoaxes and disinformation and satire and propaganda as new forms of fake news. So, oh, and by the way, I got to see the Pieta. Dan, yes, I did go to the Basilica, San Pietro, right? That's St. Peter's Basilica. And I also got to go to the Basilica of Mary Major. That's the first major basilica where, the whole cult of Mary got started. So it was awesome. So I know that you guys have gotten a chance to have a break, but I know the semester is like steaming ahead, and you're busy. But let me share my screen with you, because I'm really pleased to see that you guys have been making some good progress on your Leap 3s. So I started collecting Leap 3s. If your Leap 3 is still, not quite done, no worries. Get it done when you can. And why is this frozen? Damn, why is this frozen? Why is this frozen? Yikes. Uh-oh. So I'm struggling here a little bit with my technology. When I try to share my screen, it's not happy about that. Darn. Okay. So, and now I can't see any of you. Oh, I see hardly any of you. So I'm feeling a little like, oh boy, I'm not sure if this is gonna work the way I want it to do. And what I might have to come up with a plan B if I can't get the bandwidth I need. Let me try one more time to share my screen. Maybe that was just a glitch. Was that just a glitch? Aha! Yes, it was. Okay, cool. And I see Winnie has joined us. And yes. Good show. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, so look what I have on tap for tonight. So our theme tonight is voice, agency, process, product, and power. And we're asking these two questions. What are the power dynamics in digital authorship? And how is youth creative authorship inflected by the expectations of teachers, mentors, and guides? So let me hear a little bit about your experience with Leap 3. what were your highlights and lowlights with Leap 3? As I understand it, Donna and Wales and Lourdes, Donna and Lourdes did a POW tune on copyright for teachers. Marie and Vanessa did a, is that a Padlet on fake news and responsibility? Tori, Tori and Nicole did a POW tune. And I'm not sure on the topic of representational ideologies, I think. And check out the Storify. And I just made it into a slideshow. I didn't know if you guys knew that you could do that, but isn't it cool? The Storify can be shown in many different ways. And I think it looks really great to capture your Twitter dialogue as a Storify. I just think that looks awesome, and I cannot wait to read it. It's possible that some of the rest of you are still in the process of getting your Leap 3s together, and given that we're just back from spring break, I'll be cool with that if you take an extra day or two, so don't panic about that. That's cool. But let me hear a little bit from those of you who did finish Leap 3 about what were your highlights and lowlights. What did you like about this activity where you had to create a dialogue digitally? What were the challenges of the assignment, and what insights did you gain? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Thanks. I like the Storify very, very much. It was very simple to use. To be able to pull YouTube and other platforms in along with it made it more interesting. You can actually add text boxes and whatnot. So I really like the tool that we used. The low light was within the Twitter. I was hoping, I guess I was kind of anticipating it being more like a Twitter chat and hoping I'd get other folks to chime in, and not too many people picked it up because I would have liked to have had some variation in dialogue rather than just myself and Nada. I think Marie might have commented back on one, but I think it was after I had already worked on some of it, and Nada and I had finished our conversation. So that's the downside of it. I thought it was good tools, but would have liked to have been able to pull some other ideas and concepts in.
Right. So you were wishing for a wider range of voices to join you in your dialogue. That was the concept, but it didn't happen. And you did tag us all, but we were all slow. Yes. I think probably because of the spring break to chime in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other reflections on what was your experience with the Leap 3? What did you like about doing that kind of dialogue? What were the challenges you experienced?
I liked it. I worked with Vanessa, and I've used the Padlet before, once before, and I still am so new to it. So I was happy that she was like, yeah, let's use it. It's easy, and we can communicate and, collaborate to figure out the link. But Vanessa guided me, which was great. Cool. To how to link, different videos and articles. So I found it very easy and very informative. And it was nice that I like that we could collaborate and, kind of work together, even though we weren't together.
If I can add to that, what I really liked about using the Padlet was that I could kind of just go in my own time and, have my responses or add things, and she would go in her own time. So we were having a conversation, but in separate timelines.
Isn't that amazing?
That was good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I feel like that is a really interesting phenomenon, isn't it? That you can have a conversation even in an asynchronous way, right? So cool that you experienced that. So I think in some ways, this assignment reflects my interest in this book that I read. I don't know if you guys have read this book or know anything about it, but Julia Quiro and I wrote an article for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy on this topic. We called it The Powers of Two, right? A really interesting nonfiction writer, Joshua Schenck, wrote a book about dyadic collaboration, and he analyzed the Beatles and John Lennon and Paul McCartney. He analyzed creative teams, and he looked at why people's creativity can be fertilized by collaborating with people who are really different than them, right? That somehow the dialectic between two minds that are not the same, that are different in talent and temperament, can actually fertilize creativity. And I hope that you got a chance to bounce ideas and explore expressing those ideas with your partner in a way that might have tuned you into the joyfulness that's at the heart of that kind of creativity. I feel like collaborative work is hard. It's not easy. And there are power dynamics that are at play, but there are so many pleasures, and in some way, it's sort of like the mix of struggle and pleasure and all of that. So I feel like the Leap 3 is really trying to invite us to think in new ways about digital collaboration. So, okay, so let me continue on with our agenda for tonight, and I'm going to pedagogies of authorship. Oh, I wanted to do. It's 7. Oh, that's right. We started a half an hour late, so I'm pretty good. So I wanted to do a little mini lecture on transgression in order to set us up for these questions. Let me preview the questions that we're going to talk about in the small groups, and then I'll do a little mini lecture, and then we'll have our conversation and kind of come back and wrap it all up. This week, all the readings were on kind of really interesting, problematic case studies that had to do with power dynamics between students and teachers, between teachers and their organizations that pay their salary, between the way teachers negotiate time and space. And all of these power dynamics happen because teachers and students and organizations and audiences have different expectations for how learning should happen, what kind of process should be used to create media, what kind of product is expected, what it should look like or sound like or be like. And we've all experienced those power dynamics, both as students and as teachers. So the questions that I want to explore this week are, why do educators and scholars tend to romanticize youth voice? What is dramatized confrontation, and why does it occur in collaborative media production experiences? How do teachers manage time, space, and text as a means of pedagogic control when students are engaged in digital authorship? What can we learn about the instructional practices of, the instructional practices of youth media educators by analyzing the films that students create? You know, can we learn about the pedagogy of youth media production by looking at the work products that students create? How does multimedia storytelling help students take an authorial stance to dissolve boundaries between in-school and out-of-school identities? And then reflecting Chelsea Hoag's amazing and really interesting essay, how is youth voice structured and controlled by the agendas and priorities of the organizations that fund and support this work? So I would say, in contrast to previous weeks, we're kind of into the challenges part of the course, where we've we're going to not try to romanticize youth media, right? We're going to recognize this pedagogy of digital authorship is challenging. It's hard. It opens up new problems for teachers. And we want to try to understand those problems better and think how to move beyond them. And so that brings me to my interest in transgression. And that's a term that I'm using to explore what happens when we think about the power relationships between students and teachers. And so now give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides, how classroom teachers approach transgression in media production classrooms. Are you guys seeing those slides? I'm seeing some thumbs up. That's a good sign. Okay, so this is a little mini lecture. I'm going to try to keep this to about 10, maybe 8 or 10 minutes, right? If God is good and my internet connection is stable, right? Let's see what happens here. Yeah, so I think the thing that's obvious about the theme for this week's class is that media literacy education alters power relationships between students and teachers. Because talk about popular culture allows students to have power because they know popular culture, contemporary culture better than anybody, right? Better than we do most of the time. And because when we give students the opportunity to make choices, to select the tools they want to work with, to identify the content they want to examine and explore, when we let students make choices, we give up some power, right? So I'm really interested in this idea that the teacher's role begins to shift from just being the provider of information to being the facilitator of information as students gain more power and more control over their own learning. And so, of course, we've talked before in class about how the best way to understand this is to use ethnographic methods of thick description to describe what happens in the learning environments. But when I look at the literature, like including some of the readings we read this week, I say the overall focus is on the positive outcomes and involvements of this work, as if the transgressions were exceptions or hazards that go with the territory rather than a near inevitability born of developmental and discursive power struggles. So sometimes teachers and researchers will gloss over the downsides, right, that can occur in the classroom. The loss of control, the messy engagement, the power dynamics where it feels like the monkeys are running the asylum, right? And I feel like we need to pay attention to that and look at what happens when it happens. So other researchers have told us that inversions of gender and power in student media production can be scary to teachers. So the work of Brian Saxton from 2007, he found that when he did a media production class that the kids got kind of raunchy, and the content that they produced was kind of transgressive of stuff around sexuality. And the teacher was worried that he was going to get fired, right? And even David Buckingham, our dear, dear friend, wrote about this way, way back in 1994 when he observed a classroom where the kids were making a parody magazine of Cosmopolitan, except it was called Slutmopolitan, right? See it? And it was raunchy. And these little British kids were like making a kind of parody women's magazine in ways that were challenging stereotypes, but maybe also reinforcing them, right? So Buckingham thought that was transgressive. And even my own wonderful son, Roger Hobbs, got in a fair amount of trouble when he was in high school because as a crime writer, he was constantly writing stories that had violent car crashes and explosions and stories that were considered school inappropriate. And in a post-Columbine environment kids who express themselves can make us nervous. Here's a beautiful quote by Paul Duncan. Writing, art, and media teachers experience transgression most intensely because they ask students to reveal their hearts and minds, right? So in that context, we definitely understand how when students are engaged in creative expression, transgression can occur because students are writing about stuff that matters to them. So in previous writing, I've identified how when students use digital video for creating learning, it can be messy. The creative process can be messy, and the process of messy engagement is something that has to be managed in a classroom. So I wondered, what kind of student transgression do high school video production teachers experience? How do they interpret the transgression? What does it mean to them? So, go back. So what I did was really look at 4 experienced video production teachers. And I did e-interviews with them, asking them 5 questions. How have you handled particular situations where students have engaged in inappropriate behavior or produced inappropriate video content? Can you describe a situation that you handled well? Can you describe a situation that you handled poorly? Can you give some examples of inappropriate behavior or student-created media content that was problematic for you? And explain why students engaged in this behavior. And I had a really interesting, very diverse sample, 2 from Rhode Island and 1 from Michigan and 1 from Pennsylvania. Suzanne was an experienced high school video production teacher working in Michigan. Bob was an experienced high school video production teacher working in suburban Rhode Island. Louise was an experienced video production teacher teaching in a public charter in Providence. And James was a first-year high school teacher working in an urban alternative school in Center City of Philadelphia. So one thing they talked about, right, was the transgression that happens with students' cell phones. Can you guys give me a thumbs up if you've ever experienced student transgression with cell phones? Okay, so now we should have a little conversation about that, right? So how do you handle student transgression with cell phones? It's the most common experience that high school teachers or middle school teachers have. How do you handle it? What's happened to you, and how have you handled it?
Well, usually whenever it's happened to me, it's like in the first couple minutes of class because kids are just settling in. And so I give them sort of a second to settle in. And then if I still see it out, it's like, all right, you guys know, put it away. If I see it again, I have to take it. And most of the time, that's fine. If it ever goes further than that, it's because there's probably something going on. And I'm always pretty open-minded that I'm like, all right, let's talk to me after class, or I'll pull the kids to the side and be like, is everything okay? What's going on? And usually there is some sort of something happening. So I try to stay open-minded about that. But kids are usually pretty respectful. After they know that I see them with it, they know.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So it sounds like you have found a way to minimize the transgressiveness in a way by creating rules and routines and norms for its non-use, but respecting the odd occasional transgression. Thanks for sharing. How have you experienced student cell phone transgression? Anybody else have an experience around that transgression that's noteworthy or interesting?
I know at our high school, the problem was so pervasive that it was kind of like, if you can't beat them, join them, because kids were, doing the texting in their pockets. And so now teachers have incorporated the use of cell phones in their classrooms. And they start out by, you put them on your desk, I need to see them. We're going to use them. And actually, they're allowed to use them in between the changes of classes and in the lunch, at lunch, because otherwise they were going to try to work around it anyway. Now we don't provide them our Wi-Fi, so which is kind of a problem, I think. But kids don't want to waste their data, so they're a little conservative about when they do choose to do that. But even like I teach like some religious education classes to middle schoolers, and of course our rule is no cell phones. But they're trying, and you just kind of give them the stink eye, and you look at them and go, put it away, and they'll put it away. But to tell you the truth, teachers are not supposed to be on their cell phones, and they're worse than the kids. Truly.
You have a point there. I certainly have seen teacher transgression with cell phones.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Dan, how do you handle cell phone use in the classroom? What kind of transgressions have you experienced, and how do you handle it?
Me?
Dan.
I mean,
Yeah,
I can take
you.
over if you want to, Dan. But
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'll listen to either, Dan. I love you both.
Oh, I would, Renee, I would say a lot, and I could probably talk for 20 minutes, but the fact that the class is being recorded and it's going to be posted, I think by saying that, I've seen a lot in 18 years. And I think that the question of how to respond to how much danger there is, or how something might be trivial, it's important to not escalate things. Like I believe it was Nada had said that making something that's making a mountain out of a molehill is a problem, but then reacting to something that could be really awful is just as risky.
That's a great observation about the dangers of overreacting and underreacting, and that balance that you're aware of from experience. Dan Riley, what's been your experience dealing with cell phone transgression?
So mine is a little bit different because I have only been student teaching. So with my cooperating teacher, he was a very you can use your cell phone with whatever you want to during silent reading. And students were allowed to read on their cell phones, which is a good thing. They're reading what they wanted to read. But then when I started kind of taking over the classrooms, they seemed more and more focused on doing other things. There were specific students who decided not to partake in the reading. So it was a very difficult situation where it's like they have the opportunity to read what they want to on their phones. And if I told them to put it away, they would not, they wouldn't read, period. But then, how do I treat them and tell them, you can't just do these things, next or...
Yep. This is the give them an inch and they'll take a mile problem, right? So, and it's definitely a dynamic that the teachers in my study reported on, right? In general, the teachers in my study talked about different kinds of transgression, and they had different interpretations of it, right? And here, I feel like I've got a little, my slide is getting in the way of actually explaining my data pretty well. But I identified 4 different kinds of transgression. When kids talk about or express content that is not appropriate for school, when they express themselves using formats that are not appropriate for school, like when they make horror films, right, or porn, when their production processes are not accountable and maybe irresponsible or sometimes even dangerous, and then when they distribute their content in ways that are problematic. And so let me share with you a little bit of some of those examples. Some teachers in my study identified that transgression as just part of the creative process, right? So James said, it's okay if some of their content is inappropriate for school because it means they're really invested in the work. And James said, this is just part of creative freedom, and I have to handle it, even if it might make me uncomfortable. Some other teachers described it as basically part of popular culture, right? So they identified the making transgressive media content as sort of like the South Park phenomenon, where kids are exposed to a lot of reality TV shows and other kinds of media that have transgressive, not school appropriate content. And so, for instance, Bob said occasionally these kids don't even see it as transgressive, and they're kind of confused. Like, why don't you like what we've created? They're not even aware that it's risky or inappropriate. Suzanne described another example of kids who are just making mistakes, right? Where they might, for instance, get the camera and move around inappropriately in the school, annoying other teachers or students, and they're just not aware of the consequences of their actions. And then this was really a great phenomenon. They described this idea that sometimes kids are transgressing because they want to impress their peers, and they care more about impressing their peers than they do about the grade or you, the teacher, right? So they're performing transgression as a way to kind of get attention, and teachers were pretty well aware of that. So why is this not working? There we go. Oh yeah, and then sometimes student transgression is really just adolescent rebellion in the classic form, where students are really challenging social norms, right? Especially about sexuality and expressions of sexuality. So here's a Louise who describes this kid who made a video with a reference to a blowjob, right? And this student was very committed to this particular reference being in there, and the teacher and the school leader kind of had to negotiate, because this film was not going to be viewed by the rest of the class, essentially. And so those kind of negotiations are really sensitive, and they really have implications for the way we think about communication education in terms of how teachers manage the power dynamic, how they manage the classroom management part of the process. So what I'm really interested in is how teachers give or negotiate control along these 4 dimensions. And I talked about this last summer at the Summer Institute. It seems like teachers can decide about how to give control relating to the content of and the ideas, the topics that students explore, the format that they use to express their ideas, the actual process of creating, and then how their product is distributed. So I feel like we probably don't know as much as we need to know about the negotiations that happen as teachers scaffold learning experiences to provide a balance of structure and support for student learning. So that's really where I ended up with this project. I ended up wondering, what are the core values of teachers who negotiate a balance between creative freedom and creative control? And how does the assignment structure and the assessment paradigm shape students' experience of creative freedom and creative control? And how should educators best learn to navigate this balance? I bet you can probably see how I'm struggling with that even in this course with you, right? Trying to provide you with a blend of creative freedom and creative constraint, right? Because some balance between freedom and constraint is actually optimal for creating a rich learning experience, right? And I'm not sure anybody's figured out how to get it right, but I feel like in a way, figuring out how to manage the power relationships between students and teachers is a great opportunity when it comes to the use of digital media for authorship purposes. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, and now I'm going to go back to our questions. That was my little mini lecture. I bet it ignited some thoughts on your part in relation to the readings and to your own life experiences. So we'll play the same game we always do. I'm going to give you 7 minutes to work with a partner or a small group of 3. I'd like you to choose just one, maybe one or two of these questions and talk it over with the members of your team. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you understand what we're going to be doing next, breaking up into small groups, talking about one or more of those questions for 5 to 7 minutes, and then coming back and making some general observations. Okay, so here's the breakout rooms. You ready? 1, 2, 3, there we go. Your breakout room should be opening, and you should be moving into your breakout room now. Let's see if that works. Let me see if I can get that to work. Let's see, your breakout room is opening.
Good morning, all. Joel Shaw Rose from PPF. That's flight 1055 here at gate 831. If you want any return tickets, we ask that you board at this time. Paging the crew for 2519. We're ready to board.